Lawmakers decided that with the uncertainty of the country's economic future, inflation, and a possible looming recession, they cannot risk giving so much money away to Massachusetts residents. Although nothing is set in stone regarding Governor Baker's announcement on the tax rebate checks, Senator Velas believes it will be a credit added to 2022 taxes instead of a check in the mail. Before the change in decision, the Baker administration predicted that taxpayers could expect to see 7% of their 2021 income taxes returned, translating to around $250 for an individual earning $75,000. Thousands of dollars have already been approved by President Biden and the White House. These programs will help many Americans that are experiencing financial difficulties and affording basic necessities. The Federal Reserve is rapidly raising interest rates in order to fight inflation, announcing another sharp upward bump July 27th. And while no one likes inflation, Congress and the President must acknowledge that the sudden rise in rates can negatively affect many Americans. Rising interest rates don't affect everyone with the same way, but borrowers will pay more, and with home prices in many places already through the roof, those higher payments will cripple the ability of many people to buy a home. Nationally, the rate for a 30-year fixed mortgage has nearly doubled in the past year, and that was before the Fed's latest announcement. This will most severely affect low and moderate income families who are already struggling with the cost of housing and who generally don't have enough saved or interest or invested to get much interest on the home. Higher mortgage rates mean higher monthly payments, pricing even many middle-class families out of home ownership. While this will likely depress home prices at some point, prices have risen nationally in the first half of 2022 despite rising mortgage rates.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to celebrate a win for American farmers, ranchers, and agriculture producers. Fertilizer prices have been skyrocketing for over a year now, and with the cost of urea ammonium nitrate in particular rising at record highs. Since March, I have been urging the U.S. International Trade Commission to suspend duties on UAN imports from Trinidad and Tobago, and this week they did just that. On July 18th, the U.S. International Trade Commission rejected imposing final duties on urea ammonium nitrate, UAN, in its determination that anti-dumping activities surrounding UAN fertilizers in Trinidad and Tobago did not harm the U.S. fertilizer industry. With this determination, the ITC has finally responded to my 3 letters dating back to March, the legislation that I introduced in that same month, and my testimony before them.
The progressive wing of the Democratic Party, as well as Chuck Schumer and Warnock, who faces a tough re-election bid this fall, were among those pushing for Biden to forgive $50,000 per borrower. Throughout the public and private pressure campaign, the White House has touted its efforts to help with student loan debt through its work with the public service, loan forgiveness, and the income-driven repayment programs. Shocking news, everybody. President Biden will be announcing his brand new plan to help millions of Americans financially. Lawmakers in the House and Senate are now meeting to discuss the future stimulus package. Some GOP lawmakers are insistent that this relief be more targeted. And now, here's some exciting news. Biden has said today to announce that he will forgive $10,000 in student loan debt for millions of borrowers who fall below an income cap. After weighing executive action for months, the president is expected to reveal his long-awaited decision. The action is also expected to include extending until January a moratorium on federal student loan payments, which was implemented during the crisis, set to expire at the end of this month. Biden has said he will make a decision by August 31st, and Biden faces increasing pressure from progressive Democrats to cancel an even larger share of debt for Americans who took federal loans to pay for college. Some Democratic economists, including Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, worry about the risk of debt cancellation exacerbating 40-year high inflation. But the White House has zeroed in on a plan that would cancel $10,000 in student loan debt per eligible borrower, according to sources at least, matching a figure that Biden campaigned on. The White House has also discussed expanding relief beyond $10,000 for borrowers who meet certain criteria. The debt cancellation will be limited to borrowers with family incomes of $125,000 or less, and would apply only to people with federal loans, not private ones. More than 43 million people have federal student loan debt in the United States, and the average borrower has about $37,000. According to data compiled by the Education Data Initiative, the outstanding federal loan debt is about $1.6 trillion. Biden said in April that he was taking a hard look at executive action to forgive federal student loan debt, chief among the White House considerations in the months that followed. The possible impact on inflation that has soared throughout the year. Canceling potentially up to $10,000 in student loan debt would mean billions more collectively staying in the pockets of Americans. Some critics argue the extra money for consumers to spend risk stoking demand and further accelerating historic inflation. Biden's approval rating rose this week to its highest level since June. A new poll found that 41% of Americans approve of Biden's job performance. It was his first time above 40% since early June. In 4 of the last 5 weeks, Biden's rating rose as the Democratic-controlled Congress passed a large piece of legislation to fight climate change and lower prescription prices. Now some states are changing their minds on the next round of relief. Recently, John Velas was about lawmakers' decision to scrap the stimulus checks which were promised to middle-income residents. He called it one of the biggest disappointments to come out of the session. Initially, Massachusetts governor announced that the state would provide millions of dollars in tax rebates to the Bay. To the state residents affected the
Administrator Sanchez, welcome and thank you for coming here this afternoon. Kind of a follow-up question that the chairman was getting at as well. Kansas doesn't have a huge hurricane with billions of dollars of damage. Typically, we have lots of small disasters. It's a tornado impacting a town, 2 or 3 different times a year, and then we've had our share of wildfires as well. While the disaster office has been there for each of our events, they're at an incredibly slow pace. For example, fires in Hutchinson, Kansas on March 9th, the SBA Resource Center wasn't set up until April 28th, 7 weeks later. Constituents struggle to wait 7 weeks for that assistance. Why would there be substantial delays? What would you feel is success? How do you measure success? What would be your goal and your response team getting to a disaster?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. I'll address in part what the SBA challenge is and how we tie it to the larger picture. Typically for loan processing is about 5 days, and then disbursement of first funds loan processing is about 8 days for homeowners, 5 days for the actual disbursement. We come in on the ground after there's been a disaster declaration at the state. We are working with our state partners to educate about how we meet the threshold to try to expedite that process so that we can be on the ground quicker as well.
What about the time to be on the ground from the time the disaster occurs? How do you measure that, and what would you think? Like 7 weeks just seems too long to me.
Yeah, Senator, if that was 7 weeks from the time of the disaster, what we have to wait for to actually open the lending process is for the disaster declaration to be cleared, requested by the state, and then we can be on the ground. We're working with our partners to educate how we can expedite that for our states. But once we get that trigger, we can be on the ground within 48 to 72 hours.
So your goal would be, once the state declares a disaster, is to have presence there in 2 to 3 working days?
Yes, sir. Once that comes to us, we sign it and we're on the ground.
Okay. Again, kind of on the same long line of questionings, for those wildfires, it appears that our staff had to do most of the, I'm going to call it marketing, letting them know what the SBA could and couldn't do, how they could help. What can you do to better improve your communication to those small businesses that you're there to help them? What are the opportunities for improvement there?
I think, as the chairman mentioned, reaching into SCORE and